Hey guys, this is Yoda. This will be my Prot Warrior guide for Season 1 of War Within Mythic Plus. Servers are down right now, so we're going to go with a little bit of different format. I'm just going to go over the dock from top to bottom without looking at stuff in-game. I think a lot of people were complaining about me moving my camera around too much, so maybe this will be better off anyway. Alright, so without further ado, we'll start with the intro. So, how good is Prot Warrior? A lot of people have been saying Prot Warrior is the best, some people say it's the worst. Some people say it's like in between. Basically, in my opinion, all of 4 top tanks are pretty close. Prot Warrior is the best at mitigating damage. Your basic mitigation kit, which is shield block plus ignore pain, is really easy to keep high uptime on, basically full uptime on, and it's also really strong when it's just those up. And you also have really low cooldowns with shield wall, spell reflect, and demo shout. So Prot Warrior is really good at preventing damage taken. However, it has very low self healing. So for instance, like a blood DK or a VDH, it's not as big a deal if they lose, most of their health bar because they can just heal it back up instantly. For Prot Warrior, you're not going to lose that much health that easily. However, you can't really heal yourself that much. So whatever HP you lose, basically someone else has to heal that. Usually, the healer. So that's the main weakness of Prot Warrior. Generally, if you're like duoing with a healer or your healer is really good at like focusing you as a tank, Prot Warrior is a really good choice to duo with them. So for talents, this is my default build. It is a little bit controversial, so we'll go over the middle first. So for the middle, you always play Mountain Thane. Colossus is not really that viable in Mythic Plus. Mountain Thane gives you keep your feet on the ground, which is 8% damage reduction, which is basically you can't lose that. It also has a lot of rage gen from the Thorn's Might talent. The only real choice you have in the middle tree is like Intervene Shield or multiple Storm Bolts. Basically, it's just preference. Pick whatever you want. We'll talk about the class tree variants first. So the top and middle, you have a lot of choices. Basically, it's all listed here. You can drop Crackling Thunder, Intimidating Shout, Hone Reflexes, or Sidearm, and Intervene. Those are all like kind of not necessary talents. And in exchange, you can get Bitter Immunity, Wrecking Throw, Piercing Shout, or Berserker Shout, Piercing Howl, Bleed Footwork, Bounding Stride, Frothy Berserker, Rumbling Earth, and whatever else you want. Basically, there's a lot of variants on the left. I would say if you see 2 Prot Warriors, they're almost never going to be playing the same talents in the same dungeon. For the bottom gate, I do have a different build that I've seen a lot of people playing. So I'm playing Thunderous Roar and Cruel Strikes, and 0 points in endurance training. My reasoning for that is that Prot Warrior basically never gets one shot. As I mentioned before, they're really good at making their health go down slowly, which means they don't really get one shot, so stamina is not super valuable since that's mostly what stamina is used for, compared to, for instance, another tank where they're permanently like going tops to like 20% to tops 20%. Stamina is really useful there because like basically sometimes they go from top to 0 and they die, but for Prot Warrior that's not really a thing, so I find stamina not as valuable, which is why I kind of tend to prefer Thunderous Roar for more damage over Champion Spear. If you want more stamina, then you can drop Cruel Strikes and Thunderous Roar for the stamina node and Champion Spear talents. In the spec tree, I'm making the same choice kinda again by dropping Enduring Alacrity in my base build for Ravager. The main reason for that is because I like the flex points in the middle. So you can see the base build here. If you want Enduring Alacrity, then you basically need to drop Ravager for it, and then you need to drop 1 flex point up here for punishment, which is perfectly viable. A lot of people play that way. In fact, I would say that might even end up being better. This is just the build that I'm playing right now that has a lot more rage gen and more free flex points, so that's what I prefer. For as far as your block talents go, you always want the increased 2 seconds on block, so we're not really talking too much about that. But there's Enter the Fray versus Heavy Repercussions, and there's also Bolster that you can pick from. And which one you pick kind of depends on your haste. So if you have Heavy Repercussions is the talent that gives you the most block uptime. However, it is like kind of possible to get it 100% without that talent. So that's our goal, because taking Heavy Repercussions is a really big damage loss over Into the Fray. It also just makes you feel slower because you're losing 8% haste, basically. Basically, the way I see it, if you have less than 20% haste, you have to play Heavy Repercussions. Otherwise, your block uptime is just going to be too low. Then if your block falls off, you're probably in trouble of dying. So below 20% haste, I would probably play Heavy Repercussions. If you're between 20 and I believe it's 35, but I would say 40 to be safe, then you have then you need to play Bolster with Into the Fray to have 100% shield block uptime. Sometimes it'll be like not exactly 100%, so be ready to kite if needed, or just like don't use block if you're fighting like one mob that doesn't hurt that much. Above 40, I would say you can drop Bolster pretty safely and you still have 100% uptime on shield block. which gives you 1 free flex point for, you know, whatever you want. Show of Force, Disrupting Shout, Spell Block, Bleed damage, whatever you want. So there's the flex talents that we kind of mentioned. There's Disrupting Shout, which is AoE kick, Bolster, which we mentioned that you may need, Spell Block, depending on what you're fighting. Spell Block can be super useful or just a dead talent. It kind of depends on the dungeon / what the mobs are hitting you with. So, you know, that's a flex point. Punishment, I think, is generally not as good as the other ones available here, but you need it if you want to take Enduring Alacrity. So that's in this choice too. And there's also Blood Surge, which gives you more rage per bleed you have out. I kind of think Blood Surge is mandatory in Mythic Plus, but I've seen some people not take it, so I have it here. And sometimes you need like Bolster, Spell Block, and AoE Kick, so you can drop it there. So yeah, those are your flex points. And then there's also Double Shield Wall, which is Defender's Aegis versus Impenetrable Wall, which is like Shield Wall reduce cooldown from Shield Slam. Personally, I strongly prefer Defender's Aegis. I pretty much always play it, except in Raid. It is a little bit worse for damage and Rage Gen, since Impenetrable Wall gives you Rage Gen, which Defender's Aegis does not. However, I just prefer the Double Shield Wall. A lot of good warriors prefer Impenetrable Wall, so I would say it's definitely preference this node, but I prefer Defender's Aegis, mostly because it lets you just shield wall like for fun on pull and then still have one backup. That's talent. As far as stats go, haste is the best stat. We were mentioning some certain haste breakpoints for shield block, so hitting higher breakpoints is always good, and also it just gives you more stuff, like more thunderclaps equals more rage gen equals more anger management, which is more cooldown, so we just want a lot of haste. After that, burst is the best stat defensively, and crit is the best one for damage. Obviously, if you want to play for damage, then just use raid bots to sim your character, and I believe mastery is the worst stat. One important thing to note for your gear is that shield eye level is the most important thing for Prot Warrior. The amount that you block is scaled by the eye level of your shield, and block is like your primary form of mitigation. So if you care about one thing, it's the eye level of your shield for Prot Warrior. As far as trinkets go, Arakar Sackbrood is like probably the best one just to use baseline. And for the other trinkets, Swarmlord's Authority I think is the best. Prot Warrior has issues with self-sustain sometimes, and Swarmlord's Authority is a really good job addressing those. If you can't get Swarmlord's Authority because you absolutely refuse to zone into the raid, then some random delve trinkets are okay. Like there's a Silken Chainweaver I think it's called, that's decent. Random stat sticks are also okay, but really Swarmlord's Authority is the best one. For embellishments, in the early season, one thing a lot of people have been doing is crafting like main hand weapon, offhand weapon, or just main hand weapon I guess for most people, because it guarantees that you get a mythic weapon. If you don't do that, then you kind of are like relying on Volt RNG or getting a weapon from the mythic raid to get a mythic weapon. But with the craft, you can just kind of like guarantee it. If you do go with that route, then Ascension is probably the best embellishment to put on your weapon. The only thing is your endgame setup most likely doesn't use a crafted weapon, because the crafted weapon's max eye level is 636 and you want a 639 weapon. Same goes for your shield. I would generally craft the shield for early season, but again, that probably won't be your endgame item because you want a high eye level shield. 639 either drops from Mythic Plus in the vaults or from Queen Anseric Mythic if you can kill that. Later on, you probably want to sub 630 weapon, 639 weapon, and double focusing lens. If you don't want to use lens, you can also use Dust Thread Lining or Dawn Thread Lining. For our cooldowns, we've got Avatar. That's our main cooldown. Just use it as many times as possible. It is a very low cooldown. It's reduced by anger management, and with Mountain Thane, it also gives you double Thunder Blast, which is like really valuable. Avatar doesn't directly have any defensive benefits, like it doesn't say, oh, reduces your damage taken, but it does basically improve your rage economy. Like you get way more rage when you have Avatar active, since you're thunderclapping more, and it also gives you 2 Thunder Blasts, which are proccing your Mountain Thane stuff more. So I would consider it, you're definitely stronger defensively with Avatar than without it, so keep that in mind. Demo Shout is an extremely low cooldown with Thunderlord, and it also just has a low base cooldown, I think, of 45 seconds. One thing to note is that it's not that easy to use it instantly on pull, because usually stuff's running in, so you might not hit everything. So try and use it as like your second cooldown, usually, in a pull. That's how I try to do it. You do want to use it as much as possible though, because it has an extremely short cooldown and it is very powerful. Shield Wall, we kind of already mentioned. How you play Shield Wall kind of depends on your talents. So if you're playing Defender's Aegis, then you can usually just send one on pull, and then later on in the pull, if you're in danger, you can use it. It's kind of important also to use Shield Wall before you take damage, since if you use it after, it doesn't exactly heal you, it just makes you take less damage. And you have low self-healing, so using Shield Wall before you take damage is very important as a Prot Warrior. Last Stand also changes a bit with and without Bolster, depending on your talents. So if you have Bolster, you can kind of just send it at the start of a pull, since it gives you want to send it like as often as you can, because it gives you more shield block, and you need to be taking advantage of all of your bolsters, usually with your haste setup, to have 100% uptime on your shield block. If you don't have Bolster, then it's not nearly as powerful. You basically just use it as a self heal every 3 minutes. You can also use it randomly to increase your max health, but max health doesn't help that much since you can always just use it later. One trick you can do is if you're playing bolster on single target, you want to be like dumping all of your rage into execute and not using it on other stuff like shield block and ignore pain, which can, like, you know, result in your death if you do that too much. So using last stand with bolster is a good way to like give you a time window where you don't need to use shield block and you can just slam all your rage into execute. Spell reflect is the next cooldown we're talking about. So spell reflect basically says anything that's reflectable that's targeting you will be reflected back at the enemy, or sometimes it's just a deflect, like it doesn't reflect it back to them, it just makes you take no damage. And then sometimes it just doesn't do either of those things, and it just reduces the damage you take. Which one it does that to, it kind of depends on how the devs were feeling that day, so it's very variable in all the dungeons. You'll kind of just have to know what you can reflect and what you can't. There is a spreadsheet, I believe, made by Sense that's kind of upkept, so I'll probably link that later. One important thing to note with Spell Reflect is that sometimes you need to game the cooldown a little bit. Like, let's say your Spell Reflect has a 2-second longer cooldown than the mob's tank hit that you can reflect. Well, what you can do is you can like shockwave it when your Spell Reflect is coming up, and then your Spell Reflect will be up for a time they use it. You can also like shockwave some casters, and then that both cast on you can reflect both. You can also like kite a little bit to make time for your Spell Reflect to come back up. Gaming like that, gaming the Spell Reflect cooldown like that is one of the biggest things you can do to reduce your damage taken as a Prot warrior, since magical hits that hit you that are not reflected or spell blocked kind of hurt a lot, so that's very important. Next we'll talk about spell block. So spell block is not played in every dungeon, but when it's played it is extremely useful. As I mentioned before, any magic damage that hits you that is not reflected or shield walled or blocked is going to hit really hard, and you don't really have many good ways to heal yourself, so it's important to use spell block against those. One thing you can do with spell block, since it tends to be either like extremely valuable or useless, is in different parts of the dungeon. Like if you know you're not going to need spell block for a while, you can just use it to like stand in an AoE, which is useful to keep the mobs more grouped. That is one use you can do. Also worth noting, it doesn't do anything if you don't block, so you need to have shield block up to make this like actually 100% guaranteed to work. Next we have our random AoE skills that are on cooldown, like Champion Spear if you play that, Thunderous Roar, and Ravager. These are basically just send off cooldown for damage, but defensively it is worth noting that when you use these, they tend to generate a lot of rage, so you can use more Ignore Pains, so that's kind of useful. Battle-Scarred Veteran is our cheat death. Warrior actually has the best cheat death in my opinion of all tanks. It's only on a 3-minute cooldown. It was bugged in Dragonflight where it was just chain procking to free mitigation damage. Now it's fixed and it actually works. This talent is insanely OP. You basically can't die if this ever procs that pull. It has a 3-minute cooldown, so very useful. For Warrior, your self-healing from Health Potion, Healthstone, and Impending Victory is actually worth talking about, since other tanks like kind of just self-heal themselves more than these things, more than like Health Pot and Healthstone contribute. It's not as valuable, but for Warrior, your self-healing is very low, so Health Pot and Healthstone are actually like kind of important cooldowns for you to take advantage of when you have them, so be aware of that. Impending Victory, ideally you're not pushing too much since it doesn't really do much for your rage economy, but if you are dying you can push it, and against certain bosses, like for instance the last boss of Arakara, if your team is just feeding and you're trying to solo the boss, if the boss has a lot of adds that you can kill that gives you resets on Impending Victory, then it can become possible that way. All right, next we'll talk about your basic defensive rotation. So there's your basic mitigation, which is just make sure shield blocks up, just push it all the time. If you can push shield block and you're not like running to the next pack, usually it's a good idea to just slam it. I also have bolster, heavy repercussions if you have it, and shield charge to keep it up. As far as ignore pain goes, you want to be using that as much as possible. Don't overcap. It's way more important to not overcap rage. So a lot of the time you'll have like a full ignore pain shield, but you're going to cap on rage, so you just slam ignore pain anyway. That's pretty important. And then also if you have low rage gen, like let's say it's single target or low target count, but you're going to be taking a lot of damage, that's when you want to like ignore pain and then take some damage. It falls off, then you re-ignore pain instead of just like closing your eyes and slamming it. So on low target counts, you need to think a little bit about it. On high target counts, just like push the ignore pain button as hard as you can, as many times as you can. It's also worth noting that ignore pain and shield block are both off global, so you can just push them without thinking about your levels too much. Also as a Prot warrior, make sure that you're always facing the mobs. Some tanks don't necessarily need to face every mob because they can kind of like get away with healing themselves through it, or they're not too reliant on their blocks, parries, and dodges, but Prot warrior is extremely reliant on block as a form of mitigation. So make sure you're always facing the mobs. If you ever don't face them, you're probably going to dip really low on health or proc cheat death. As far as cooldowns go, your cooldowns are very, very low cooldown, which is one of the strengths of Prot Warrior. I will say generally Demo Shout is not able to be used on pull because most pulls in Mythic Plus have to be like gathered, and then you can't Demo Shout if they're like all running in because it won't hit all of them. So you have to use Shield Wall or Last Stand usually on pull. You're also a little bit more in danger on pull than usual. Like other tanks are Omega in danger, Prot Warrior is a little bit more in danger because usually you won't have your bleeds running. You might not have an Ignore Pain because you don't have Rage from last pull, and you also can't Demo Shout them. So just generally it's important to use something on pull. Then you go into Demo Shout. Then after that I would reassess like how hard the pull is. If it's a really hard pull, you can start slamming other cooldowns. If it's easy, a lot of time you can get away with just using nothing except Shield Block and Ignore Pain. For your offensive rotation, the way you usually play it, so always use your cooldowns off cooldown, obviously. We should put Avatar here too. Avatar. Okay, and then for AoE, you're going to prioritize Thunderclap over Tactician proc over Shield Slam over Revenge. The reason we prioritize Tactician proc over Shield Slam is because Revenge just does like a lot of damage in AoE. However, if you are in danger, then you need to be generating more rage and not using any rage on Revenge. So we change the priority by moving Shield Slam above Tactician proc. So it's Thunderclap, then Shield Slam, then you only Revenge if you have a proc and these two are on cooldown. And you don't dump any rage on Revenge. If you're in danger, you want to spend everything on Ignore Pain, so you just hold your global at that point. Single target, if you are in execute, basically, you just want to prioritize getting as many executes as possible. So that means if you're going to overcap rage, you push execute. If you're not going to overcap rage, then you want to generate rage. So like if you're at 20 rage and shield slams up, you don't push execute, you push shield slam. So we prioritize execute only if you won't overcap, then shield slam, then thunderclap, and then execute. Then like if your shield slam and thunderclap are both on cooldown, then you can dump your rage on execute. Then you can use tactician proc. And then, you know, if you're not an execute and you can't use shield slam, thunderclap, or proc, then you just use revenge. If you're in danger on single target, which can happen, then just don't dump your rage on anything except ignore pain, and you only use shield slam into thunderclap or tactician proc. On low targets, which is like 2 to 3, then you don't use tactician proc over shield slam anymore. You prio clap, then shield slam, then tactician proc. For utility, we have a lot of AoE stops. Warrior utility is not as strong as a lot of other tanks, but you do have a lot of AoE stops. You got Shockwave and Intimidating Shout and Disrupting Shout. Do note that Intimidating Shout is target capped, so if there's like too many mobs, then you have to target the actual mob you want to use fear on. Storm Bolt obviously a single target unless you have the Storm Bolt's hero talent. Generally, the only important thing here is to make sure that other people's kicks are on cooldown usually before you slam your stuff. It's kind of awkward if you just like walk into a pack, no one has kicked yet, and you just like Shockwave. That's like kind of awkward because you're not letting other people put their kicks on cooldown. You can also use like AoE kick or shockwave to set up your spell reflex. In terms of targeting your allies, you're not super useful, except you do have intervene. So some abilities where like generally mobs that target your allies and just throw something at them, like throw flesh, shoot, firebomb, that kind of thing, intervene super useful against, but it does move your character when you intervene, so try not to like displace the entire pack when you use it. The first boss in Necrotic Wake also randomly, his wretch can be intervened, although it does hurt you when you use it. And you also have rally. The only important thing about rally is that if someone wouldn't have died, then then rallying basically does nothing. It doesn't increase their healing taken or anything. So only use it if they're going to die if you wouldn't have used it. As far as macros go, I have intervene target of target as a macro. So basically this is super useful on like the first boss of Wake, as we mentioned. He targets someone with healing a wretch. You can just push this without having to think about frames at all. You just push this and it intervenes them. Do pay a little bit of attention to where they're standing, because if you push this and then it just slends you to like somewhere random, they can surprise you. I don't really use too many macros for Warrior. Other than that, I just have like add cursor for Ravager, Champion Spear when I'm playing that. And you can do it for Heroic Leap, but I don't use that. And that'll do it for the guide. Thank you all for watching. If anything is really dumb, be sure to tell me in Twitch chat or just send me a DM or whatever. And that's it. Thanks for watching, everyone.